colleagues, we'll make a start. Welcome to the regular Audit and Governance Committee. Before we start, can I just bring to your attention some housekeeping? No expected fire alarm testing today, so if you do hear it, please follow the signs to the nearest fire exit and meet at the assembly point, which is by Cafe Roma, you know, the little coffee shack in the Civic Square. Please, can I ask that you use your microphone when addressing the meeting and that it's switched off when you're not using it, and that your mobile devices are turned to silent. This meeting is going to be broadcast to the internet live and will be capable of subsequent repeated viewing. By entering the Warspite meeting room and during the course of the meeting, you are consenting to being filmed and to the use of these recordings for webcasting. Everybody clear and okay with that? Fine. First of all, apologies. Have we received any apologies, Hannah?
No apologies received, everyone's here.
Excellent. Next, we move on to declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest in respective agenda items? No? Good to hear. Minutes of the last meeting. Does anyone have any corrections or points of accuracy? Councillor Rainsford?
I'm not sure whether there's a point of accuracy, Chair, but point 26, audit actions review. Is it appropriate at this point, forgive me because this is still new to me, is it appropriate at this point to ask whether point B, whether Mr. Northey, more detail was needed where action had not been taken? Is it possible to find out whether or not detail had now been pursued on that issue? 26B.
Through you, Chair. Yes, so we presented a report, and my understanding was we said when it comes back in the cycle next time, we'll make sure that there's more clarity and it's more user-friendly, I think was the phrase I used. Yeah, so that work is being undertaken.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from the minutes of the last Audit and Governance meeting? Okay, so can we agree that those minutes? Brilliant, thank you. Item number 4, urgent business. David, I think you had a brief update.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought it'd be appropriate at the start of the meeting so that we all know the direction of travel, I suppose. It's very clear that we should be discussing in this forum where we are with DLAC in particular and about the reason for the 1920 accounts not being signed off. So I thought I'd just give a brief statement and hopefully we can all move on from today. So it's good to see Paul, a colleague from Grant Thornton, joining us today. We are working together and I can inform you that I have had several discussions with colleagues from DLUC. I've filled out all the questionnaires, I've answered as many questions and sent them as much information as I possibly can. So they are fully up to speed. I am now in their hands and waiting for them to come back. I was on leave last week, but I did leave a note with them to say when I come back, and they've agreed to meet again this week for an update. I fully understand some of the complications that they said. They do have other authorities further down the line than we would be considered, having issued things such as Section 114 notices, and they have the autumn statement. But to me, that's noise in the system. I just want to get clarity. And it's perfectly clear from Grant Thornton's point of view that time is of the essence as we move towards setting a budget for the next financial year. So that's where we are, and I will update this committee as soon as I have something concrete to actually say. And I think rather than us sitting here today talking about the whats and ifs and so on, let it keep going as it is. And the best approach I can take with colleagues from DLUC is to keep this as low under the radar as we can, so that whatever they come forward with hopefully is advantageous to us as it can be. And I know one of the questions was, are you sure that you're getting the right support from DLUC? And I am. I've got 3 case officers now working on Plymouth. So whenever I make a call or ask for a meeting, they do promptly come back to me. But that's where we are, Chair. And as soon as I've got anything, I will, of course, update the committee.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to item 5, which is the counter fraud half-year report. And this item, I think is Ken Johnson. Welcome, Ken.
Make sure that works. Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, before you is the counter fraud half-year report for 23-24. Obviously, the report goes into detail about what we've done over the past 6 months. Reporting on fraud is part of good governance, and will assist the organisation improving that. The report is fairly self-explanatory, but just to say the savings that are being sort of generated through counter fraud activity are actually increasing, and we're anticipating that they will increase as we go forward, as we use more and more data accuracy and NFI specializations. So just to run through it for you, we're about the referrals that we've dealt with are very, very similar to previous years. We're on a low impact sort of strategy, in as much as we are doing, as I say, a lot more data driven investigations than we've ever done before. What that does is allows us to be much more flexible and deal with an awful lot more cases. We're continuing to run data matching exercises, as I say, across the piece with various departments' data, and an awful lot of the savings are coming out of that. Also providing training to, as I say, one of the teams that we did recently was the low carbon energy team, which was really, really useful to understand the new grant systems that are coming into play. So I'll go through it a little bit at a time. There are sort of best practice responses to counter fraud work that is expected of local government, and Plymouth has always ranked quite highly on that. What we're going to try and do over the next year or the next 6 months is actually drill down into that and get a much more granular understanding of some of the risks, and try and deal with those for you, or help you deal with those. So we're trying to, as I say, we've said this before, but we're trying to integrate counter fraud risk management and internal audit. So it gives that sort of integrated approach to assurance. And all that basically means is assurance is giving you the confidence to make decisions and understand where that is. Of note for this report is, you may have seen it referred to before, is the NFI, the National Fraud Initiative, which is a biannual exercise run by the Cabinet Office. It's really, really pleasing to see the response in this NFI from certain departments that have really, really sort of gone and done most of their matches, all the high risk ones certainly. And the recordable savings from that, as I say, are quite substantial. And even where, I think I can quote the finance team, we had some matches back from the NFI, which basically said that Plymouth City Council may have overpaid VAT, which was slightly worrying. When we checked into it, it was absolutely fine, and all the records were absolutely clear. So it's not just about finding the fraud, it's actually giving that reassurance that what you do have is actually correct. So that was really important as well. And it also clarifies that you've got the right data. So, as I say, with that potential VAT overpayment, we were able to say with a clear conscience that actually everything was absolutely fine. And it's a very blunt tool sometimes, so it doesn't really come across. It doesn't interpret the nuances of the financial system sometimes. We have ongoing investigations, obviously, but for us, the main thing, as I say, is to try and tie in this integrated assurance going forward. You'll see from the recordable savings, they are comparable with previous years. If anything, they're higher. But when we take into account the good work that Plymouth City Council departments are doing in their own right, I mean, we support the work, but it's actually Plymouth City Council departments doing the work. The figure is absolutely a lot higher than it's been in previous years, so that's to be commended. Just some further information for members. There is a new offence being brought forward. It's actually gone through royal assent. An offence of failure to prevent fraud. As soon as that becomes law, obviously I'll update the committee, but what that is an outward-facing offence, which would basically, someone would have to commit fraud to the benefit of the council against another organisation. So I say when that comes into offence, when that comes into effect, I'll let you know. It could affect arm's length management companies, wholly owned subsidiaries and that sort of thing. So it's just something to be aware of in the future. And there's another report there from the International Public Sector Fraud Forum. Fraud is not going away. I think we're all aware of that. I think we all know the seriousness of the situation with budgets and everything else. So anything we can save is becoming more and more important. And just to conclude, it's been another good 6 months from the team and from the council. We continue to work well with departments across the council. We have good access and they continue to support us and we continue to support them. And I'd just like to say, as I say, it was the digital and customer experience team, the strategic plan and infrastructure team and the finance team that really went the whole hog in sorting out the NFI matches that were coming through this year. So that's really to be commended. Just another positive report, and the report is for note. Okay, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ken. Over to you, committee. Any questions? Councillor Rainsford.
Can I take you to the theme risk on, I think it's about page 20 of your report, themes and trends debt collection overview, where you talk about the debt collection being spread across a number of different departments within the council.
Through you, Chair, I think that's probably the audit report.
It is the audit report. Apologies. Yes, you're right.
Yeah. This is the counter fraud report.
Yeah, and it talks about there being a reason.
Councillor Rose, because it's the audit report.
It can't be asked. Okay.
Yeah, it's not for Ken to answer. We'll get to that in due course.
I could try.
Anybody else? Any questions for Ken? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we will move on to the internal audit half-year report. And Louise, our audit manager, is going to present this. And the purpose of this is to provide members of the Audit and Governance Committee with the mid-year assurance opinion of reasonable assurance on the adequacy and effectiveness of the authority's internal control framework, a position statement on the audit work carried out since April 2023, and the review scheduled for quarters 3 and 4. With the rapid pace of change in local government, we continue to liaise with management to flex the plan as appropriate, to ensure that work focuses on those areas which add most value to the council in these challenging times. The risk-based approach has resulted in changes to the audit plan, with new areas being included, which in turn necessitates some areas being deferred to next year. So, Louise, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. The internal audit half-year report you'll find on page 15 of your report pack. In accordance with the public sector internal audit standards, the head of internal audit is required to prepare an annual report providing overall assurance opinion that can be used by the organisation to inform its annual governance statement. This internal audit half-year report provides members with a mid-year position on work carried out to the end of September and provides a position statement on the progress towards that annual audit assurance opinion. On page 2 of the report, or page 17 of the report pack, you'll find, based on the work performed to date, our experience and current year's progress, the head of internal audit's report mid-year assurance opinion is reasonable assurance. This means that there's a generally sound system of governance, risk management and control in place across the organisation. This opinion is informed by the results of the individual audit assignments completed since the 1st of April, and this is summarised on the chart on page 2. The chart on page 2 actually details the final audit reports that have been issued, and this is included in detail in Appendix 1, along with audits that are currently in progress, scheduled to start later in the year, and audits that have also been removed or replaced due to reprioritisation of work. Members should note that the chart on page 2 summarises the assurance opinions for the final audit reports issued. There are a number of audit reports that have been issued with limited assurance opinions, details of which are also set out in Appendix 1. These are not included in the table on page 2, as they were drafted at the time that this report was written, but these have now been finalised, and they have been finalised as limited assurance reports. So this will affect the overall chart on page 2 if you were to have an update as of this point. But overall, the actual opinion would still remain as a reasonable assurance. This, however, could change as we progress through the rest of the year, but the committee will be kept informed of that position. When undertaking our audit assurance, we assess whether controls are operating satisfactorily and that exposure to risk is minimised. An opinion on the adequacy of the control environment is provided to management as part of the audit report when we've completed our audit review. And management are required to provide a response to the audit observations and agree a management action plan to take action to address any risk or control issue identified by the audit. Sometimes these can take some time to progress, especially where service areas are under pressure. You will note that on the bottom of page 8 or 23 of the report pack, the report indicates that we had not received a formal management response to our follow-up on the special guardianship orders report. I'm pleased to advise members that management have now provided that response, and we thank the Director of Children's Services for actually enabling us to conclude that audit. We are currently in the process of reviewing the audit plan for the remainder of 23-24 and planning for 24-25 with responsible officers and service areas. This looks at council priorities along with current and future risk, finance and performance positions and projections to ensure audit resources are focused on areas of need to support the council in its delivery of its objectives, as well as enabling an annual audit opinion statement to be made. Members, can I just ask that the Audit and Governance Committee are asked to review and note the mid-year assurance opinion statement and findings within the report. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Louise. So, before we proceed, I should have made it clearer. Are the committee happy to note the half-year report on the counter-fraud half-year report? Just so we're absolutely clear. Thank you very much. So, back to the internal audit half-year report. Any questions for Louise? Councillor Rainsford.
Sorry, I'll try again and see if I've got it in the right place this time. It's Appendix 1, Themes and Trends Debt Collection Overview section. It talks about when income recovery reaches a point where human intervention is needed, there's a resource shortfall. Is that a risk that's growing or diminishing, in your view?
Through you, Chair. This particular piece of work is actually a draft report that has been issued to the Section 151 at the moment. What we found when we were doing a lot of our work in 22-23, so whether that be council tax, debtors, adult social care, there is a problem when debt recovery reaches a point and no further action is taken. So we have good automated controls in place, the systems in place to actually progress debt recovery to a certain point, the letters going to recover the debt, all of that is in operation and working. But once those avenues are exhausted, it stops. There's limited resources within the debtors team to actually continue with that recovery and sort of take targeted approach to recovering the debt. So there's a paper, I believe, that Section 151 is actually preparing, or one of his members of staff are preparing, and that will look to address the issues that we've identified. So it's a council-wide sort of approach. So it's actually how are we going to deal with the corporate debt, and I think there's a plan coming ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Mrs. Benny?
Sorry about that. So a question around page 23 and 24 and the areas where you've got limited or we've got limited assurance. How is that in? So two questions, I suppose. One is you've got limited assurance in those areas. Have you, as a result, identified other areas to test in those departments or teams? And then how is that informing the audit plan either for the rest of the year or into next year?
Thank you for your chair. Yes, so these absolutely will be using the limited assurance audit reports and the work that we've done to date to determine, because obviously that's a risk, those are areas of risk, to help us decide the audit plan into Q4 and also into 24-25. So where we have limited assurance audits, we do then follow up on management action to ensure that action is being taken, but also we will use that to develop our audit plan for other audit areas where we see that risk will continue or similar risk may be leading into other areas. So we will actually, as the report says, move our audit plan to address those areas of risk. And we are at the moment having those conversations, and we're trying to link up better with regards to the risk management team within Plymouth City Council and the finance team, so that we're all working together. We all know what the risks are. We're all open to those discussions, and then hopefully with regards to the management teams within the service areas, we'll take our findings to them, and obviously we can have that conversation about risk and identify those areas for the work plan going forward.
Yes, just one extra question. It's brilliant, thank you. And just can I just ask, when you do the work and you say working with the risk team, for example, is what you're finding triangulating with what they're identifying in the risks area? Because it's always really interesting, isn't it? Is it something that just pops up, or is it something that it's seen and known about?
For you, Chair. Yes, it definitely is, and we're trying to make it better. We're trying to make that stronger in the way that the visibility of risk and audit and the understanding of how it all works together is becoming more understood within the service areas. And I think that is absolutely key, because we should all be, as part of that compliance process, be looking at the same things, making sure that all the risks to the authority are addressed. And I think there's been a process where we've gone through a programme of business planning, and obviously from that then stems out the new sort of risk management, risk registers, which is obviously the Council's risk management team are working on, and we're sort of linking in with that to make sure that we raise that visibility, and hoping to do that in a variety of ways to make sure that we're all looking at what is important and where the focus needs to go to address the risk to the authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Finn, did you indicate?
Yes. Hi, Louise. It's just regard to residue risk audit management. However, when income recovery reaches a point where human intervention is needed, there is a resource shortfall. What is that resource shortfall, and is it being addressed? Especially in light, obviously, we've got a lot of businesses, especially builders, on a daily, weekly basis going to the wall. Obviously, business rates, etc., need to be collected. Is it being affected by the lack of resources? Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. I would say with regards to council tax and business rates, the debt recovery review for the council does work really well, and it's just this small proportion where all avenues are exhausted that it becomes to a point where the resources to focus on that debt has been lacking in recent times. But there is a plan of action, and action has been taken to put resources into those areas. And obviously there's also a business case, I believe, that is actually in process at the moment. So that will have additional plans to address where those shortfalls are. But with regards to the business rates and council tax, the actual debt recovery is very high. We're still reporting high levels, 97, 98% recovery at this point in time. So it's not actually affecting the overall recovery rate, but it's those that are getting to the end of the automated recovery process is where we found that then the debt stalls a little bit to be recovered.
I'm just going to bring David in here, who's indicated.
Yes, sir. Just to add a little bit to that. So we do, when we're setting the budget, it's very important what collection rate we think we're going to achieve. So we've set for the last couple of years 97.5%, which doesn't mean that we ignore the remainder. We do keep chasing it. But as Louise has sort of stated, there is a business case working its way through the system at the moment, which does address the issue of maybe we cut a little bit too deep when we were reviewing the staffing levels. So the business case puts back, I think it's 6 people into the team, which is quite a strengthening number, and that will be paid for by the fact that we'll be chasing and collecting extra debt. So we did make a conscious effort during COVID, to be fair, to sort of stop harassing people and chasing too hard. So that's why we've got a backlog at the moment. So there's a 2-pronged attack. One is to tackle the odour outstanding, but more importantly is to get a handle on stopping debt escalating in the first place. But there is a business case coming forward.
Any further questions on the internal audit half-year report? Okay, so the recommendation is to review and note the mid-year assurance opinion statement within the report, and then also review and note the findings within the report. Is committee happy to do that? Brilliant, thank you. Next item is the Treasury Management Strategy. Wendy Eldridge, the lead manager for Capital and Treasury Management, will present this. And the purpose, it sets out the strategy for 2024-25 and includes the annual investment strategy, the non-treasury management investment strategy, and the minimum revenue provision statement. These are required by the Chartered Institute for Public Finance and Accountancy, or CIPFA for short. It's their code of practice for treasury management in the public services. So, Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. Going to just quickly draw your attention, the recommendation that we're seeking the Audit and Governance Committee to make is actually recommending the Treasury Management Strategy for 24-25 and not 23-24. So there was, sorry, apologies, there was a small typo there. The key objectives of the Treasury Management Strategy are to ensure that the organisation has sufficient funds to meet its short-term and long-term obligations, minimising financing costs and maximising a return on investment. Treasury management encompasses a wide range of activities, including cash management, funding and investment management, risk management, and working capital management. I'm going to take you to page 54, which sets out the statutory and performance framework and approach to investment, which so that sort of sets out how we're going to how the council is going to invest its money, with a key point to note that as part of the budget setting assumptions for 24-25, we've forecast the average rate of return to be 5%. Then moving on to page 55, sets out our rules for borrowing, and again the key points are the forecast capital expenditure for 24-25, which at the time of the production of this report was 147 million for 24-25. I will stress that this figure was based on the month 7 forecast, and since then there's continues to be active review on the capital programme to review its its accuracy and realistic profiling across the cash flow years. The updates on the 5-year capital programme are reported quarterly to full council and monthly to the council management team. So there is a lot of review done with the programming of the capital programme. Key numbers to note are the forecast, well, 1,050,000,000 capital financing require, i.e. the amount that we would need to borrow for 24-25, our with a breakdown of total debt, and our operational boundary, which is our practical ceiling for borrowing in the year of 1069 million, with an authorised limit which is introduced to allow for risk. So if there was a risk with any of our income collection methods, that recognises the council would need to actually borrow more at any ad hoc arrangements. Then sets out different indicators, and again picking up the key council budget assumption for 24-25 is the assumption of borrowing at 5.5%, and as you appreciate in the press, that is a figure that changes. It feels like weekly, but as the Monetary Policy Committee meet, we get again a bit more movement. Sort of the strategy reports do come a bit like buses, that they sort of come in their different groups. We've set out the sort of capital programme. We've got the treasury management strategy that incorporates our investment strategy and our minimum revenue provision statement, which I'll go on to. The council use specialist advisors on and close to support the council with its borrowing and investment activities or advice, and we've currently incorporated the economic background as at the September from page 57, but that will be updated as we get more economic advice for them as we get closer to budget setting, when this report goes forward to the full council. I suppose the key point to note is the interest rate forecast, which obviously our treasury management is quite pivotal on how we manage the council's resources. The current Bank of England rate is 5.25%, having seen a sort of stabilisation in that area. There is an expectation, or a forecast from our advisors, that from Q3 2024 there'll be a slow reduction with interest rates, with the expectation for the Bank of England rate to be around 3% by early 2026. So that's a key point. Moving on to page 60, this sets out our borrowing forecast, which actually feeds back into the table of our borrowing, how it's broken down with external and internal borrowing. Following pages sort of set out our sort of strategy, which is obviously in light of the high interest rates at the moment. We're taking a lot of short-term borrowing decisions while rates are high, so we're not tying the council into longer-term high rates. Where any opportunities come up to review any of our long-term fixed rate loans, we're reviewing them where there's capacity to do so. The council has protected itself quite a bit over the last few years, with increasing its PWLB borrowing across 50 years, which has secured rates of sort of between 1.37% and 2.54%. And in addition to that, the council has also undertaken a rate swap arrangement, which again has protected a further 75 million. So against the risk that we've had with interest rates, a lot of the council's borrowing is protected. I would just stress it's the programme going forward that has the risk with the current high rates we're experiencing. From page 63 onwards, there's various prudential indicators that we report on as part of the strategy as our targets, and then in a further report, I'll be referring to the mid-year report, which shows movement, our achievement against those targets that would have been set as part of our 23-24 budget setting. Sets out our sort of operational boundaries, our authorisation limits with a bit more of a breakdown, and then we go on to our our investment limits on page 68. So this is where the council have set, with advice from Arlene Close, the limits to protect the council's resources or its investments in the various areas we invest in. And then moving on to the page 72, that sets out our exposures that we have with interest rate risk. So as I mentioned, we have protected quite a bit of the interest rate exposure with fixed rate opportunities, and recognising a lower rate of variable interest rate exposure, but accepting that that will increase over the next few years while rates are high. There's also on page 72 sets out our exposure to maturing borrowing. So again, it's recognising that whilst we will have short-term borrowing exposure in the next 12 months. We limit that where we possibly can. And then on to the on page 75 is the property regeneration fund. So this is where we're not actually got a cash investment. It's sets out the property regeneration fund and the returns we get from commercial property net income, which is delivered through our place directorate, and the return there and the recognition of the value of assets that the council hold at the end of 22-23 for the return of its investments. Investment property returns is 238,425,000, and then finally on the page 79 it sets out our minimum revenue provision, which is a key requirement that we make provision for the repayment of debt. So that sets out within our revenue budgets we incorporate a provision for the minimum revenue provision, and that is across the life of the asset being created. So with sort of land or building related expenditure, that tends to be spread over 50 years, whereas vehicles will be a lot lower. And that's the main points of the report.
Okay, thank you, Louise. Councillor Finn's already indicated, so do you want to go ahead?
Yes. We're going to page 55, the Treasury report. What provision are we making to paying down the debt? And point two, of regard to that one question, are we able? And basically the second question would be, regard to the Treasury management report, what would the implications be if the DLUC decision comes back detrimental to the authority? Would it affect the interest rate swap?
Sorry, before we answer that one, can I just go back to my statement about where we are in our conversations with DLUC? I think that's another maybe, could be, and I'll address that as and when it comes through.
Sorry, so in the interest of all those present, so in separating that, what we're actually saying is it could affect the interest rate swap because it's to do with the interest rate swap. That's just to clarify that point, David.
So there are two separate issues. There is the pensions that we're talking about. Then we have the interest rate swap, hedge, whatever technical term you want to use, which is in place, and that will continue as it is, because it's a really good deal, and it's a deal between us and the bank that just happened to have covered 72 million of the previous decision.
So there's no causal link. There's no causal
So there
link
shouldn't be
between the
any
two.
connection between the two, but I don't know what DLUC are thinking.
Okay. So we can just answer the first.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So first question was, what are we doing to make provision to repay debt? And there's that is very much a cash flow, a cash management action. So throughout the year, if we hold higher balances in scenarios such as where we get grant monies in advance, we will use that to repay short-term borrowing in advance of taking out further short-term. The minimum revenue provision that we make every year, which is circa 20 million, is used to reduce our requirement on borrowing. So we're not necessarily repaying some of the debt we're just taking out. We're using that to borrow less through the year. So.
No, thank you, Wendy, for that. It's much appreciated.
Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a query about the Council's planned capital expenditure and financing forecast on page 64. The 26-27 forecast for grants and contributions, there's a significant jump. In borrowing, a significant drop-off. Are there reasons for that? Because it's...
Sorry, through your chair. So just to clarify, you're looking at the borrowing line where it jumps from 49 million to 101 million. Is that the?
No. Sorry, no. I'm looking at there's a chart graph, page 64, estimates of capital
So
expenditure.
Okay.
26-27 is the where there are a couple of either big jumps or hot.
Right, okay. So the significant jump with grants and contributions from 25-26 is where we've built in an assumption with a project securing additional grant funding, quite a major project around the Manadon areas, the road network around Manadon. So that's where that has been sort of incorporated as a forecast, which is a major scheme, the same as we would have had with Forder Valley Link Road going in. So and then the borrowing, again, this is where and I'm trying to, again, it's the schemes where we have got we've done a lot of reprofiling, and the borrowing will be also a mixture of service borrowing and corporate borrowing. So the service borrowing is where a service will fund that borrowing from the development. So certainly within 24-25 and 25-26, there's a lot of investment around the Freeport. So that would be a significant factor within that.
David?
Could I just supplement that, Chair, so that it's really useful observation. It's a bit like stargazing a little bit and trying to think what the future might be. But if the government have announced quite early that we will get significant grant funding, we will do a business case and put that into the capital programme. So you will see that coming through. In terms of borrowing, obviously there is a delay between actions today and what that will mean. So the fact that we are now experiencing the highest interest rates for as long as we can remember, and the fact that we are being even more cautious about what we commit at this stage, you would expect to see it tailing off as we go forward. So we've got to cover the programme that's already in place and been approved, but anything new coming in will be under further scrutiny.
Thank you, and I assume that also reflects the forecasted drop in interest rates as well.
Okay, I've got Mrs. Benny and then Councillor Dr. Mahoney.
That's lovely, thank you. So just page 60, the graph there, the forecast borrowing and investment. And I suppose what struck me, and it's building on the conversation, the sort of actually what we've got is an increase in terms of the borrowing, haven't we? And I suppose over time, is that graph going to keep going up and up and up? or is there a point in time when actually we'll see a reduction in that borrowing overall? Because it was just very visual to me that it's just going up. and I suppose then my second question is, where is it, and when does it become too much borrowing?
Thank you, through your chair. Yes, at the moment the borrowing is going up. It's really being driven by the capital programme. It's an ambitious capital programme. It will continue going up while there continues to be an ambitious capital programme. If there were no further projects added to the capital programme, say from 26-27, you would see that borrowing go down, but it is very much being driven by the high investment of the high borrowing to support the investment to date. So that was that question. What was, could you?
And then my question was, and when does that become too much? Because
Right, okay.
you talk about borrowing limits and things, and actually, you know, how far up does that graph have to?
I suppose in simple that terms, it becomes too much when the revenue budget that's being set cannot afford the borrowing requirement to support the capital programme. So it is a little bit chicken and egg, but the borrowing, the capacity with the revenue funding that the council received will ultimately control how much we borrow as part of producing a balanced budget.
Oh, sorry, Chair. Sorry. And so set out the report, and I accept it's a very technical report and not easy to get around. But the reason we bring this here is because we set ourselves limits. So we set ourselves a borrowing boundary, if you like, an upper limit, and we keep a close eye on that. So if it ever were to nudge, then we'd have to come back and report a breach, for want of a better word. But that's our sort of control bands that we work within. And you're absolutely right. You know, 5.5% is not the best place to be when you're trying to borrow money, is it? So that's why we've put our foot on the brake and everything's slowing right down.
Councillor Mahoney.
Thank you, Chair. Borrowing is going up inexorably, it seems. We've just had a scheme mentioned to us, the Manadon scheme, which I think is in the pipeline for 2 or 3 years' time. It's a huge scheme, 130 million, I'm told, at today's estimate, probably more, which the government may pay 85%, but that still leaves us with a large chunk of money, which we will have to borrow. So actually, there may be a lot of grants coming in, but we still borrow. How are these schemes reviewed? Because it seems since the Manadon, since the relief road went in Fowler Valley, the problems at Manadon are a lot less than they were, don't exist. And actually the disruption and the cost, in my view, is becoming very questionable. There are other problems with bottlenecks in Plymouth, but I don't think it's the Manadon interchange anymore. And yet it sits here as a huge cost to the government, and it's our money anyway, taxpayers' money, and to the local authorities. So that is something that's been mentioned and I think needs to be highlighted as to whether this is actually where we should be going.
Through you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to highlight the forecasts. They will, all projects that are yet to go into the, well, the projects would have been built in as an element, as an assumption, but they will all be subject to a full business case, consultation, etc. before so the items that you were highlighting will be reviewed as part of that. So at this stage, this is just us being prudent, looking at the horizon with our borrowing, etc. But the reality will go through its own capital governance process.
So again, Chair, just to reiterate, I suppose, what Wendy just said. So this report is the boundaries and the parameters and the making sure that we have got everything covered if everything went as we are looking. But we're certainly in a position now that something like, take the Manadon interchange, it might have been considered to be a good idea 3-4 years ago when borrowing was 0.5%. it doesn't mean that it necessarily will proceed without another review to make sure that it still meets the criteria and does is affordable. But that's just one example, but we're doing that with the whole programme.
Councillor Finn.
Yeah, just take on from what Mrs. Benny said, and I think it's something that we've looked at over various meetings. Would it not be reasonable, rather than sort of a bit of here, a bit of there, it could be this, it could be that, that we actually set a debt ceiling? That's the figure, that's what we work to. If we're under, good, we pay back debt. If over, but at least we have a figure then that we can work up to or work down from, as opposed to this constant readjustment. Oh, it could be as a bit of this, it could be a bit of that. So everybody is absolutely clear where we stand with regard to, especially with treasury management.
Thank you, through to you, Chair. I suppose to a degree we are setting our annual debt ceiling. I suppose the wider viewpoint of setting an overall debt ceiling that thou shalt will not borrow above X amount is ultimately going to be driven by the capital programme and the requirements to support development within the city. So that would be a wider discussion rather than looking at the borrowing in its own area. It's looking at the wider implications of social and economic benefit across the city with elements of the capital programme to deliver.
Sorry, Chair, just in terms of later on the agenda, we've got the half-year Treasury Management Review, which is an opportunity to look back and see how close we've been working within the parameters. So this report, as I said, sets out these are the guidelines, this is the upper limit, so there will be warnings, and if we were to breach it, we'd come and report that. But we do get that half-year and end-of-year review where you look back and just see how we were doing. So.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Not a question, but I just wanted to thank Wendy because I found the green boxes really helpful to sort of take me through the paper. So thank you very much. It was really well laid out. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. There's nothing further. We'll move on to the Treasury Management Mid-Year Review. And again, Wendy, I believe.
Through you, Chair, could we just read through the recommendation for that one,
Oh,
please?
beg your pardon. So the recommendation is that we recommend the Treasury Management Strategy 2023 to 24 that incorporates authorised limits, operational boundaries and prudential indicators to the Council for approval. We're happy to do that.
Through you, Chair, there is a slight typo in that recommendation, as Wendy said at the beginning, so it should say 24-25, but
Right,
otherwise that is
okay.
the correct recommendation.
So 24-25, happy to accept that. Thank you. So we'll go ahead with the Treasury Management Mid-Year Review, and I believe, Wendy, this is also you.
Yes, this is the next bus report. Thank you, Chair. Yes, the mid-year report, as David's mentioned, this is a review of our Treasury management status as at the 30th of September compared to the strategy report that would have been produced 12 months ago and approved by full council on the 27th of February earlier this year. And the key points on this, we've got again through our enclose update on the external contacts affecting the treasury management functions around borrowing, around inflation, etc. We're then taking to the point at page 91, it sets out what our net borrowing was at the 31st of March 2023 at 559 million, offset by its reserves, borrowing offset by reserves and working capital. we then, on the top of page 92, sets out a breakdown of our usable reserves for information. And then table 2 sets out where we have borrowing and investments have moved from the 31st of March to the 30th of September. And you can see where we have got the benefits, certainly within the PWLB fixed rate borrowing, where we've managed to offset the pressures that we're currently seeing with high interest rates. But at the same time, we're also able to benefit from the higher interest rates through our investments that the council has made through various sort of money market funds with day-to-day cash and other pooled investments. Table 3 sets out again a little bit more detail of the breakdown of our borrowing position and setting out the movements there. And then on the top of page 95 sets out our investment between short-term and long-term investments. Keeping one of the key things from a revenue perspective that we're monitoring, or if it's been included within monitoring that has been reported as part of the revenue forecast at the top page, or within page 97, as there's a current forecast that the Treasury Management budgets will deliver shy of £500,000 saving in this current financial year, and that is as a result of the benefits it's receiving through the rate swap arrangement and ongoing benefits of interest rate being linked with longer term investments and reducing the exposure. That's page 97. Then from page 98, it picks up our compliance to our prudential indicators. So from our investment limits, we have complied with the investments that we've made this year, and the same within the borrowing limits that were set as, and our aim for security for investments to be at A-rated organisations. And then finally we go over again. We've set our limits at the top of page 100 on our exposure to fixed rate and variable rates, which again have been complied with. Our maturity structure of borrowing have been all complied with, and again, as mentioned, we've got we've limited the amount of exposure we have over 12 months or over lower periods of time as a result of to alleviate the risk of refinancing while interest rates are high. Then on page 101, which I think is probably, this is the sort of diagram that I think Councillor Flynn would have been looking forward to, and Councillor Benny is actually seeing when actually if we stop doing everything, this is where our borrowing would drop off. Obviously this is showing it as a snapshot at time with our current sort of borrowing and benchmarking of the capital programme as it currently stands, noting that we've got a 5-year capital programme, so beyond that is creating that downward slope of debt liability. And then on the final page is just setting out again some of our enclosed economic forecast, which again is just reiterating the expected interest rate cuts to reduce to sort of around 3% Bank of England by early 2026. So
Thank you. Any questions for Wendy? Mrs. Benny?
Yes, please. Just a quick one, Wendy. So page 98 onwards, we've got the compliance, and really good to see lots of green ticks. I suppose if I was trying to lift the lid on that, are there any risky areas? So are there any where they're a bit like behind those green ticks? And if so, how are we managing the risks? Well, you get those little ones you think, phew, I've ticked that green, well, yeah, but it's all a bit close to the mark. So I'm just interested to understand behind that, are there any risky areas?
Oh, Wendy, do you mind putting mic on?
Yeah, sorry. Not directly risk as such. I'd just draw your attention back to the upper limit of fixed rate interest exposure, where we're actually at 77%. Our target is a maximum of 80, so we are complying with it. That's our sort of probably tightest percentage, and obviously it's maybe an opportunity risk should we have opportunity to change some of our borrowing from variable to fixed rate. We would be limited with whether we would exceed that target that we've set ourselves. So that obviously at the moment the fixed rates are high, and actually the variable rates are not much lower. So we're not. I don't perceive it as a risk, but it is something that could possibly stop what we might want to do in the forthcoming months if there is a change in fixed rates that we would want to take advantage of, as we did in 21-22.
Can I just ask then, so what might happen, so if you reach the target, but actually trying to do something around these was to the benefit of the organisation, is there a renegotiation on the limits?
Through your chair. It's not necessarily a renegotiation, it's just an acknowledgement that the target that we set has been breached and we have an explanation. So I recall something similar happened a year ago when the council did pursue transferring a lot of its debt from a further debt from short-term to long-term fixed, and that did create a breach. But it was, as long as there's, like I say, we were able to explain the breach, and obviously a breach being created by us investing money at 2.54% for 50 years. Yes, it was a breach, but it wasn't a significant. The worst breach we could have would be our borrowing limits and us exceeding those, because obviously that has longer term consequences. So
Thank you.
David, you indicated?
Just a quick, as always, Mrs. Benny, an interesting question, an observation. So on page 98, as you were saying, I think my answer to that question would be, yes, it's great to see a whole list of ticks. And picking up on your question about, well, what's hidden, I would be concerned if any of those 23-24 actuals were getting close to the boundaries that we'd set, but I can't see any that make me nervous. There's enough headroom in all of those to, even if we were to take a sudden swing on one of them, there'd be enough time to recover. So I'm fairly confident that that's all covered. I think my point that I would take you back to is on page 93, which is the table 3 borrowing position. So you'll see that the composite, when you put all the all the different borrowing that we've got going on, we come out with an average rate of 2.77%. So to me, to answer what would the risk be, I'd go to the short-term borrowing there at 75 million or 90 million now at 1.5%, because when that expires in a short period, we're not going to get anywhere near the 1.5. The rest of it is locked in for a sizable period, so that's okay. So that would be the one that makes me a little bit nervous if I were to get nervous by any of this, but I'm not.
Any further questions on the Treasury Management mid-year review? No? Okay. So then the recommendation is to note this mid-year Treasury Management report in order to comply with the SIPFA Code of Practice and discharge our statutory requirement. Is committee happy to note this? Brilliant, thank you. We now move on to item 9, the capital finance strategy. Wendy, I think this is your third and final bus.
Yeah, so as soon as they come in threes, you think, right, here we are. Thank you, Chair. This is the third report that sets out the council's capital financing strategy. So it is part of that suite with treasury management, with borrowing, etc. It sort of sets out where we've gone. Well, and it explained the capital programme as it's currently approved. As I mentioned earlier, it is a document that a programme that gets regular reviews and is certainly presented quarterly to full council to acknowledge the actual governance for the capital programme, or adding capital projects onto the capital programme, are for schemes that are up to and including 200,000. They are have an approval through our section 151 officers, and any scheme above 200,000 takes the form of a executive decision, which is approved by members and has a call-in period. So the council sort of set out their capital plan and their capital programme, which will fit into the annual budget setting process, as well as a review of the capital pipeline, which is shortly to go through the current 24 budget setting budget scrutiny programme. On page 109, I'll highlight the current 5-year programme as at the 30th of September that would have been presented to full council last week. It sets out a 5-year programme of totalling 373,765,000, and then below that is the breakdown of funding across the various sources of finance. Take it on to page 110. We have a breakdown of how the programme's being funded, and as you can see, the largest element of the programme being funded is through borrowing, which again, as highlighted before, is the area that has that risk with current borrowing rates. So that's where it'll be incorporated within the Treasury Management revenue budget as part of budget setting to ensure affordability. It sets out a property regeneration fund, and where the council will make economic decisions capital programme decisions that supports the economic development of the city, and looking at how the council manages its corporate property portfolio, and then finally it's really just setting out the context that the as with other strategies, this is a requirement of SIPFA's prudential code, and as a recommended best practice for presentation with the Treasury Management reports.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy. Committee, any questions? Mrs. Benny?
Just one. So I'm just, it's just because I might have missed it, but I can't see it there. It's more about in terms of capital financing and the projects within, and given the level of inflation, has there been some adjustment or cushion built in contingency to help support and deliver the projects? Because I'm just aware that things are galloping in terms of inflationary pressures, aren't they? And that hits capital projects significantly, doesn't it? So I'm just interested about what's behind that in terms of the overall programme and within the strategy.
Okay, through you, Chair. Each individual project will have an element of, generally have an element of inflation built within that. It'll be part of the project officer's role to review the affordability of that project through its creation or through the asset being created, and review where there needs to be action to either review the programme and or to identify additional sources of funding that might be needed to support the completion of the project. So it is a battle, it is a challenge, and it is recognised, and the decisions do come back through. If they're less than 200,000, they'll go through to the Section 151. The decision would go through the executive decision where inflation costs have been exhausted, and there's no other option than to seek additional support of financing from within the council.
Thank you. Councillor Rainsford?
Thank you, Chair. Mine's sort of a much more general question, cutting across a number actually of papers, and I should have asked it earlier probably. Debt ceilings are set on projects and the future assumptions on debt ceilings are directly oh, I've got an echo. Are directly affected by.
I know you want feedback, but that's a bit
my hearing aid. Directly affected by interest rates and other outside influences, aren't they? So those will change as a result of any changes up or down in the interest rate.
I think the question, like with reviewing the cost of borrowing, this is where, let's say, we will be, we're doing quite a bit of work at the moment, reviewing the capital programme and looking at the opportunities where there are to hold a project or to reprofile it into a future year when interest rates will be a bit lower. And it's also looking at the right time that project it needs to be delivered. So again, that's a wider project management review of how projects are managed, either taken forward or held.
I'm sorry, just supplement to that. So for the last 9 months, I think it is, we've been working to an in-house assumption that the best rate we could get for new money is 6%. So all business cases have to cover at least the 6% hurdle, even though, as you can see, we're achieving less than that, but that's the hurdle that we set, and if they don't meet that bar, then it doesn't proceed. So.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens, I think I saw you indicate.
Yeah, thanks. Our job here is very much a regulatory one to make sure everything's being complied with, and just having a look in the conclusion, the prudential code is set out there, the prudential code for capital finance in local authorities, and it says we, along with all other local authorities, have to have in place a capital strategy that sets out the long-term context in which capital expenditure, borrowing and investment decisions are made, and give due gives due consideration to both risk and reward and impact on the achievement of priority outcomes. I'm not seeing anything that deviates from that. So I just want to put on record that from what I can see, David's getting worried there. No, there's no. I do trick questions sometimes, but not here. No, I think we're meeting that, and I think from our lay side of the table, we should put on record that that's the case, and especially, I was going to say, officers use this phrase "challenging economic times." I think there's other language we could use, because these are very, very difficult economic times. We've heard reference to the inflation rates and interest rates that have gone up in the last sort of few months exponentially. Given all that, I think we're doing our job well. So I just want to put that on record, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Finn, I saw you indicating.
Yes, just one, Wendy. When we talk about the capital projects, are we looking now so that we know that whatever figure stated in the beginning becomes a figure at the end, more fixed contracts for development, say Manadon, that when we engage Aspire, it's not left on never ending. They can come back and say we need another 5-10 million over a period of time to fund that contract. That we're looking at more of an all-encompassing contract that says that's 50 million, that's what you sign up to, and that's what you have to deliver on X time scale to prevent any extra overrun with regard to funding.
Chair, through you. Each project will have its limitations of where we can fix in. So it will be at whatever stage a contract is, a project is exposed to. So if we were using Manadon as an example, we would be quite exposed with that. And so when the actual individual sort of negotiations or a procurement of a contract takes place, that's when there will be that review of the affordability of the project. Obviously, there'll be projects within our capital programme, such as the crematorium, which will be at a lot more advanced state, and their contracts will be fixed in. So it's very much individually where we are with that project, but overall there'll be still that bottom line requirement of the affordability within the approved capital programme, and where it's not affordable, then other decision brought back through the correct governance route to actually address or look at the options that we have to address that. But generally the first rule will be looking at what value engineering a project can undergo to manage its cost.
Brilliant, thank you. Any further questions for Wendy on that report? Wonderful, thank you, Wendy. And so the recommendation is that the committee recommend the capital finance strategy to the council for approval, again to comply with the SIPFA code of practice. Is committee happy to do that? Brilliant, thank you. And now we move on to item 10, which is the risk and opportunity management strategy. I've got here 2023 to 25, and I believe, Ross, you're going to present this.
Thank you, Chair. I won't talk too long about the strategy. Certainly members who have sat on the committee before will notice that the main principles, core principles and the elements of the strategy are broadly similar as to previous years. I think it's the main focus of this year's review is to make some progress against some of the recommendations we had from the external review of our risk processes last year. So that suggested that our risk controls are working, but they're exposed to further degradation, and that risk management is absolutely embedded at a strategic level, but there was work to do around the operational. So what we've done with the risk strategy this year is look to move things around, make it very clear for our members of staff what you need to do to identify and analyse your risks, and what you might need to consider when you're seeking treatment to mitigate against them. So the strategy this year will be supported with a greater emphasis on our Team Plymouth colleagues. Those are our third tier managers and above, which will be a move away from our current system of risk champions. Now, we've had risk champions for a number of years, and they're spread across the authority. And of course, as roles change and as people move, it does lead to some inconsistency in our approaches. So we're going to focus on that Team Plymouth level, because it's a well-recognised cohort of staff at an appropriate management level to be able to assess and mitigate any risks within their service, and escalate to their departmental management teams and onwards to the corporate management team, and here as the third and final line of defence. We are instigating a new process for collation and amendments, so we're trying to utilise as much of our Office 365 capability to make sure that the bureaucracy which surrounds a risk recording and risk treatment is minimised, so it doesn't become overly burdensome, and that our third-tier managers aren't spending all of their time reporting on risk, but actually doing something about it. We will be developing, or we have developed, a new SharePoint site just to make sure staff are able to access departmental registers, access information in terms of guidance around risk scoring, and where to access training. We'll also be working with our new service director of HR in terms of developing a package to support managers across a number of compliance activities. We have been very clear to reference the new health and safety risk processes which have been undertaken and led by Kirsty, our new head of health and safety. Those currently being monitored through the ShearSure system, which is a very health and safety focused software system, but we're working closely together to make sure that health and safety risks are reflected in the overall risk register. So we're doing some more work with our senior leaders within the authority. We will, over the course of the next couple of weeks, be having discussions at departmental management teams about risk appetite and risk tolerance, particularly in the service. So we've got a very clear risk appetite that has been in our strategy for a couple of years now. We also talk about risk tolerance, i.e. the amount of risk we're willing to tolerate around any single risk, and that will be a discussion for our departmental management teams going forward. The result of all of that will be that here at the Audit and Governance Committee, you will receive in future a Microsoft BI dashboard, giving an overview of the strategic risks that are currently facing the authority. Now, there is a version of one in your papers currently, but I'd be quite happy to, and we can go through that in the next agenda item, but actually I've got something to show on the screen which I think might be more useful going forward. I'll leave it there, Chair, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you, Chair. My question is actually about the way in which staff below the third, well, predominantly staff below third tier report concerns, risks. I'm assuming it has to be through SharePoint mainly, could be verbal. Is it possible that they can do so anonymously, or do they have to, if they've got a concern about a risk, does it have to be by name?
So the expectation would be that it would be the third tier managers that were recording risks. And the reason for that is when you look down certainly some of our operational risks, you will get a sense that the authority and its staff are very risk aware and most likely bordering on risk adverse quite frequently. So I think what we could end up with is a lot of high scoring risks that we'll need to then go through and have a conversation about how that's mitigated and whether it actually is the level of risk originally proposed by that member of staff. The reason that we've chosen Team Plymouth is because those managers are the ones that hold regular one-to-ones, lead those service discussions, team meetings, those sorts of things where we're encouraging those risk conversations to take place. And what we need to do is empower our managers to be able to carry some risk because there will be risks that are able to carry. They'll be able to apply their service area policies. They'll understand their finance. They'll understand their performance. So we expect there will be an amount of risk that all of us will need to shoulder and continue to work within. However, of course, if that risk is cross-cutting, it's showing an impact that's going to be quite, catastrophic or major upon the council. What we're developing is a consistent and clear route to record that risk, to give that manager some confidence that by raising that risk, it will be discussed by their senior leaders within the service and escalated if required, or support given from DMT to that particular risk owner. So that's what we're aiming to do. that moves us away from the risk champions model, which, whilst in some areas it's worked brilliantly, other areas not so much, generally because of the movement of staff and people, other than any other reason. But that's the approach that we've gone for. I think it's important to say at this point, we have on our risk pages made it clear where if staff have concern, how to access whistleblowing policies. If it's a health and safety risk, where you would need to do that, so that the adequate signposting is in place to make sure when those issues arise, they're dealt with in an appropriate way.
Thank you, Mrs. Benny.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. So I'm referring to page 128/129, talking about the risk appetite. And I'm just interested in terms around a little bit around process, because I know from being on another board, it's always a challenge to get to grips with some of this and have a really good discussion. So I'm interested to understand, how did you get to these appetites for risk? And then in terms of the statement that's underneath the box, how will these be reviewed and with whom?
Right, thank you, Chair, through you. So as I set out right at the beginning, this hasn't actually changed since last year. We know, so the risk appetites that currently exist in the strategy existed before me. So they remain broadly as they've previously been. Now, as we move forward over the next couple of weeks and months, in our discussions with our departmental management teams and our managers, get a broader understanding of some of the risks that we may not know about at the moment, it's possible those risk appetites will change. And of course, what we'll do is bring any updates that are required back to the Audit and Governance Committee. That will be an ongoing piece of work. Yeah, we plan to do that over the next month or so, and the Chief Executive's pushing us to make sure we do that before Christmas.
Just brilliant. Okay, that's great to follow. And I suppose the key bit is making sure that the final appetite is up with the corporate team and members, presumably, because ultimately that's the decision-making piece, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're trying to do is get to a point that when you are all seeing, so this place, our corporate management team, cabinet councillors and so on, are able to see how those risks sit against that appetite. Now, it's not particularly clear in the way that we've presented risk information previously, so generally you just get a big list, which is sort of what's in the papers now. We've tried to take that on a bit over the last couple of weeks, which I'd like to show you in a moment. So our risks will be set against risk appetite and risk tolerance. So you'll be able to start to look to see where we're comfortable at the moment in terms of our risk, where we're not so comfortable, and where we need to make some immediate changes.
Okay, any more questions for Ross on this report? No? Okay, so again, we have a recommendation, which is that the committee note the risk and opportunity management strategy to 2025. Is committee happy to do that? Excellent, thank you. And then item 11 is also Ross. This is the risk management monitoring report to November 2023. So Ross, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just going to get this up on the screen. Hopefully everyone can see that now. So you do have a version of this in your packs, but as I said, work is ongoing against all of our risks and the risk dashboards, and we'll keep investigating and trying to improve the level of information and its usefulness to you all. So this is the risk dashboard that we look to, so just on the screen, actually, if I probably best to focus on the screen for the moment. This is the risk dashboard for strategic risks, which we feel are important that this third line of defence is aware of. Currently, we've set, what we're trying to do is give you a sort of graphical view of the current overall risk status of the organisation. Now, it's currently shown as orange severe, and that's because we are always going to be on a severe footing if we have any risks that have a impact score of 5 or catastrophic impact, irrelevant of the probability. So, however likely a catastrophic incident is, we're gonna leave it there as something which needs to be mitigated against. So that currently shows that we've got 2 severe risks. And what we're also doing is making sure that they're updated on a regular basis. So through this dashboard, we'll be able to ensure that that's the case. Now, unfortunately, because we have to publish your papers as papers, the interactive elements of the dashboard are difficult to see. But I think what we might be able to do in the future, Chair, is organise a SharePoint page actually where members of this committee will be able to access that information. So just going through it then. This front page gives you that overall risk status, and using what is a fairly standard risk matrix, give you an idea of the number of risks that we've got sitting in each of those areas. We've then got our overall position post-mitigation. So that's 15 strategic risks. And what we're trying to do there is also show you the spread of those across the risk categories. So compliance, regulation, safeguarding, financial, operational and service delivery, development and regeneration, people and culture. There is a couple of other categories, reputation and strategic change. We don't currently have any high-level risks appearing in those risk categories, which is why they don't appear in front of you today. So moving away from what's in your pack, which is the great big long list of risks, where we want to get to is give you an idea of how each of our risks sits against our risk appetite for each of our risk categories. So here on the screen now is the risk appetite analysis for a compliance, regulation and safeguarding. What you'll see in our risk appetite bar graph there is that we have absolutely no appetite for risk around compliance and safeguarding. We would expect risk to be down in this area, and that's our approved risk appetite. This area is our risk tolerance, where we're not happy, but that's where we're experiencing higher level of risks, and we are applying treatment against them either through corporate management teams or departmental management teams, action plans, etc. And then this higher level is the risk capacity. Then that's where we've got quite big problems when we're seeing risks in there, and there'll be a organisational approach to addressing some of those. So of course, across the course of the dashboard, we do the same approach for each risk category. So this is how the reporting will look in the future. I'm happy to take questions there before we just cover the risks themselves, Chair. Unless you're happy for me just to carry on.
Just check with the committee. Any questions on this actual presentation?
No.
So move on to the risks.
Okay, thank you. So, as I said, we are undertaking quite a long and ongoing review of our overall risk register. So that means that whilst we've said in our report that the total strategic risks currently being managed are 19, it has in fact reduced to 15, and 2 of those risks, rather than 4, are currently scored as severe. Main changes in the overall strategic risk register over the course of the last review period are a reduction in our risk probability against council expenditure exceeding resources available. That follows the approval of the new medium-term financial strategy. And following discussions with our 151 officer, we've reduced the overall probability of that risk. The Sustainable Urban Drainage Approval Body was a risk raised by our planning colleagues. So there's some quite significant costs around the SUDS approval body. However, the relevant legislation has not been laid before Parliament yet, so it does need secondary legislation. We're not sure when that's going to happen. Whilst we're unclear, we've reduced that probability and we'll monitor it through departmental risk registers. There's been a good deal of work, and many members certainly will be aware, around homelessness in terms of a massive rise in demand and our ability to meet our statutory duties. So that both represents a financial risk in terms of our current cost of providing temporary accommodation, certainly in bed and breakfast and hotels, but of course a massive impact on families in the city. So there is a homelessness risk in reference to that bed and breakfast accommodation, but a new risk in terms of the overall demand on the homelessness service. And the mitigation against that is a homelessness recovery plan, which has been developed, and I think further details are likely to be published soon. Following discussions with our Director of People, we've reduced the overall risk around the lack of adult social care workforce. The advice has been that that is making a recovery overall, so it's becoming easier to get hold of that workforce. There has been a number of mitigations put in place by the service. Again, this one's going to drop down. It will continue to be monitored as an operational risk within the service, but we don't consider it's something that we require. We would require your assurance around at this point. Housing delivery, the risk score again has been reduced following mitigation by the service, so is going to continue being continue to be monitored at departmental level. And the same applies to the viability of commercial bus operators, which has been removed from the strategic register following the endorsement of the bus service and improvement plan. And again, another risk which won't disappear into the ether, will continue to be monitored, and where required you may well see it again. As part of our risk monitoring process, as you'll be aware, we've made risk a standing item on our scrutiny agendas. In the last cycle, they didn't receive a risk update as the new processes were being developed, and just in terms of committee cycles didn't quite match up. However, they have been addressing risks through their discussion. So they recently had the chief executive in actually to talk about some recruitment risks, particularly around senior leadership positions. The Children's Scrutiny Committee continues to focus on some of the big risks facing children's services at the moment, particularly following SEND review and so on. So it's very much an issue that's been addressed regularly in scrutiny. And I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. So any questions for Ross? Yeah, Mrs. Benny?
So it's not a question, more of just an observation. It was just so much easier to read and not swamped. So it'll be interesting to follow it through the next year or so and see how it moves. And it'll be easier to track, I think, as well. So well done. Thank you.
I've got a brief one. You mentioned that in future the presentation that you showed, that's going to be on SharePoint. Does that mean it'll be a living document and updated in real time?
So we'll have another, yes, as far as possible, I think. So the change to the way that we're going to collate and process risk, which I won't sort of bore the committee with, fairly technical, but what that will result in is a single table with all of our risks facing the authority. What we'll then do is use the tools that we have available to slice and dice that for the right purposes, appropriately for audit or for scrutiny. So we might have a dashboard which is purely for children's scrutiny, which focuses on those children's risks. Now that table and the dashboards, yes, they will be real time. and certainly there'll be real time for our departmental management teams. Whilst all of that is automated in real time, we still need to make sure that there's that human element. They will be near enough real time, but we'll make sure that we set up a page specifically for the audit committee to review them.
No, that's helpful, and I think a very sort of welcome development in the interests of transparency and oversight. Thank you. So if there's no further questions on this, again, the recommendation is to note the current position with regard to the strategic risk register. Is committee happy to do that? Brilliant, thank you. So now we'll hand over to Paul Dossett from Grant Thornton to present the external audit progress report.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Good, thank you. So this is our progress report. It's a progress report and a sector update. I'll take the sector update as read, but I can answer any questions that members have. In terms of progress, there's three things I want to talk about: 1920, 2021, and the government's plans for addressing the audit backlog. So in terms of 1920, your Section 151 officer has already outlined where we are vis-a-vis discussions with DLUC. In essence, the audit itself of everything else is complete, but we need to understand where that position gets to. And obviously that as time moves on, the criticality of resolving that issue increases quite considerably. And so we're obviously hopeful and optimistic that that matter is resolved in the near future. In terms of 2021, the report sets out a bit of detail about the work we've done, because one of the things that we reflected on was, as the 1920 audit was delayed for a long time because of this particular issue, the pensions issue, we wanted to make sure the committee was briefed about that we were actually getting on with other aspects of the audit, like the 2021 audit. And so we've set out in detail, not in our normal sort of audit findings report detail, but just a detail of what risks we identified as part of the audit process and the work we've carried out in respect of those. And just to reflect on the fact that on the value for money side, we've completed our value for money responsibilities up to and including 21-22, and we are underway with our 22-23 work, which should be reported to the next committee. So in terms of the value for money part of our responsibilities, actually we'll be pretty much up to date in the very near future. The third thing I want to talk about was the government's plans for the dealing with the local audit backlog. I think it's September 23, that backlog was an official 913, which there's only 400 or so local authorities in England. So I think it's an average of 2 each or something akin to that. And the government have recognised that, particularly as a result of some of the authorities where there's been significant challenges, such as Woking and other places, Thurrock and other places, that clearly leaving a current year's sets of accounts unaudited is not a sustainable long-term position. And of course, that does not give assurance to members and other stakeholders in council. So they want to move that on. They have a provisional, they had developed a provisional approach to, they wrote to all councils in July saying that they were planning to do a backstop. They didn't give any details about when at that stage. There was a provisional approach which we've discussed with DLUC officials. That was that March 24 would be the backstop for all audits up to and including 22-23. That hasn't become official yet, and we don't quite know when that is, or if that is to become an official date. But by our working premise, we have to plan and work on something. So we are still working to that 31st of March deadline, and we've agreed with the Section 151 officer that, notwithstanding the issues with the pensions prepayment, but if we get that done in 2021 done, the other two audits, if March is the backstop date, will not be completed by that time because there's not enough time to do those. Implications of that are that the DLUC and the FRC will provide what's called a technical disclaimer, some qualification, which will effectively mean, which will apply to an awful lot of authorities, and it will technically mean that the auditor then has to do more work on opening balances of the authority for the 23-24 audit, because this time next year, I believe DLUC has a clear ambition that everyone's as caught up as they can reasonably be, and we don't have this backlog into the longer term. So that's where we are on that. How that will move in the next month or so, I'm not sure. There's a consultation that's due out, hopefully before Christmas, on DLUC's proposals for the way forward. But we'll have to wait and see on that. And I'll stop there, Chair, and happy to take any questions from members.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. So I'll throw this open for questions. Wow. Nothing at all. Mrs. Benny?
I'm just formulating the question. In terms of the work that's ongoing within here, so some bits which you've got assurance on, but in terms of the work that's ongoing, are you on track with that? Are there any issues? Have you identified any stumbling blocks in it, or are you expecting just to complete as planned?
Yeah, so I mean, on 1920, the only stumbling block is resolving the pensions issue. So there's nothing else in 1920. I think in 2021, I mean, the report sets out the progress we've made. We have been having some discussions with the council about classification of financial instruments, and some discussions about valuations, but none of them have the sort of impact that the pensions issue had on 1920. So they're not items of materiality or concern in their own right, and not matters that impact on the general fund position, which is obviously where we're most concerned if something were to impact on that. And I think the other thing I would say is that because we are up to date certainly up to 21-22 on our value for money work and undergoing 22-23, the wider issues around financial sustainability of local authorities, which obviously, as you'll all know, is a big issue, and we're moving perhaps towards that tipping point where local authorities, there's been a set of local authorities who've had to issue Section 114 reports, who have made decisions which certainly in hindsight appear to have been unwise. And we're now moving to a place where authorities in a more normal sort of run-of-the-mill type way of operating, with no significantly risky portfolio of investments, etc., are really struggling because of all the reasons we know about, the cost pressures and demand and things like that. So I think we're okay at Plymouth in respect of some of those things in relative terms. I mean, I'm sure that Section 151 would elaborate all the challenges you do face, which are numerous, but they are numerous as they are with other local authorities. So there's nothing particularly I'm concerned about in the wider sets of accounts at this stage.
Thank you. Any more questions for Paul? No, thank you very much, Paul. And the recommendation is well, there's no recommendation because it's an external report from Grant Thornton. So thank you very much. And we'll move on to item 13, which is the work programme, which is pages 171 to 176 of your packs. And I think, Ross, you wanted to say something about, was it the Southampton recommendations, the constitutional review? Or is that
Chair,
Giles?
it's me.
Oh, it's you, beg your pardon.
That's all right. It's just at the last few meetings, the issue of when the council consults on its election cycle has been raised, and it's been raised at council meetings in between. And I thought it might be useful, firstly, just to update the committee, and secondly, to suggest a proposal at the January meeting of this committee to be included as part of the work programme. So we've met with officers from Southampton City Council on several occasions now, and they have very generously shared with us their data sets and their approach to their electoral review. And also their approach, because they did the same, they also consulted on their election cycle at the same time, which was one of the reasons for selecting Southampton, as well as its demographic similarities with Plymouth to liaise with. And members will also be aware of the committee that we've now met with the Local Government Boundary Commission for England. So a briefing to all members last week, which I think was most instructive. And also they've briefed our leadership, and we've also had officer briefings as well. And we're effectively left with a choice following the decision by full council to consult to either undertake a standalone consultation. The local electoral, the body has made it clear to us that the legislation has changed since the last electoral review the council had. So any council either contemplating or actually having elections in thirds must have a number of members per ward divisible by 3. So if the city council was intending on retaining elections by thirds, it would need to avoid having 2-member wards unless there were very, very specific circumstances. This was slightly different in Southampton because they didn't have any 2-member wards, they only had 3-member wards. So the decision facing the council is either undertake a consultation in advance of the beginning of our electoral review in June, so that if a decision is made to retain elections by thirds, then the Boundary Commission will ensure that the result comes back to Plymouth of no 2-member wards, or bearing in mind that the electoral review asks for figures 5 years out and will be in place, certainly on our current experience, for at least 20 years, because that's where we had the last one, decide that it might be sensible for to make it clear that 3-member wards would be acceptable regardless, in which case no decision would have to be made about thirds or all-out elections, because both would apply. And then the question could be asked during the consultation around the new ward names, boundaries and sizes. So either before June and in the case of all-out elections being considered for the council, we could carry on having 2-member wards, or after June and accept that 3-member wards would be appropriate as a methodology for the Boundary Commission's work in the next couple of years. But either way, it seems appropriate to come back to the Audit and Governance Committee in January with a final solution, having discussed it with all the key stakeholders, including the leadership of both groups, about the way forward.
Thank you. Any questions for Giles? I think, Alison, you had your hand up.
Just a clarification, please, Giles. The process for the Boundary Commission requires a decision from them on how many members per ward before they get into the next part of the process, which is drawing the lines of the ward boundaries. Is that correct, or have I got the wrong end of the stick?
That sounded like a really sensible question, didn't it? And how annoying that I'm going to give a really complicated answer. So the only rule governing the Local Government Boundary Commission is that a council should be able to elect its ward number of members per ward should be divisible by 3 in the case of elections by thirds. It has no other interest in the council's election cycle at all. Thing one. Thing two, two distinct decisions that will be made during the Boundary Commission. The first will be how many members in total, with no consideration of wards or boundaries, and then secondly, wards and boundaries. But I probably haven't answered your question.
Is it in that order?
Yeah, it is in that order, absolutely.
No.
First decision, overall number of councillors. Second decision, ward boundaries and numbers within wards.
That was clarification I wanted, thank you.
Councillor Mahoney?
Thank you, Chair. Giles, so if we went down the road of 3-member wards, we have the option of thirds or all out.
You've just effectively summarised about 15 minutes of my noise, Councillor Mahoney, so congratulations.
Yeah, but it would be nice, would it not, to know what the electorate might think? Because some people do get fed up with voting, there's cost implications, yet again you hear people say on the doorstep. So we don't actually know what the Plymouth electorate thinks. And I think we need to know whether we stick and have all 3-member wards, or if they agreed that we had all out, maybe we do need some 2-member wards. There's some slightly problematic areas. So, are we not going to consult, or is it up in the air as to whether we do? I'm a bit confused.
I think the full council made a decision that we should consult, so I don't think that's at issue. I think the question is whether we consult as a freestanding question or as part of the overall consultation over new revised ward names and ward boundaries. And one of the reasons for talking to Southampton is they took the latter approach. They had exactly the same issue in the council as to what their election cycle would be, and they decided that they'd ask the question about cycles at the same time as asking for feedback about the Boundary Commission's proposed ward boundaries and ward names for Southampton. They ended up sticking with thirds, all 3-member wards, and they gained, in effect, as a result of their electoral review, they gained a whole new ward and 3 more members, if you see what I mean. That's no indication of what our review would look like, but that just happens to be the outcome for Southampton. So decision stands to consult. Question is, when? Is it in advance of any electoral decision, or is it as part of the overall electoral review consultation, I think?
Any further questions? Okay, thank you for that. That was helpful, Giles. Bill, I think this is an appropriate point when we're discussing the work programme. Have you got anything from the Working Party on the constitutional review?
Well, the last set of decisions came to the full council. So when we meet again, and I think it's worth putting on record that it's a very, very useful process. I hope John agrees, who's a member of the group. It's a really good way of tackling those sort of, if John will forgive me, nerdy type issues that a lot of people shy away from, but are absolutely essential to good governance and smooth workings of local authorities. So looking forward, we need to wrap up the terms of reference for the proposed standards committee, and Alison's been tasked to go away and do a bit of research on that, which I'm sure she's well on top of. We've also got the financial and contract standing orders to look at. I think, Ross, is that right? There's also some work on our scrutiny structures. We touched on that last time, but again, that's back with the political groups to consult on, and some issues at the full council. Never mind boundary changes. It must be coming up to 15 odd years since the full council structure was looked at, and I think it's well overdue for, if not a refresh, at least a glance to see if it's working okay. Is there anything that has changed in terms of how we do things that needs to be reflected in our procedures? Anything that needs to be brought to the surface? You'll recall we looked at the petitions procedure. Ross, could you perhaps remind us where we are formally with that? Because we did an awful lot of work on that one, and we had some submissions, I think, from Councillor Poyser, who made 1 or 2 points. But where are we overall with that? If I can do that through you, Chair.
Well, through you, Chair, I think the only change we were asked to reconsider from council was the acceptance of third-party petitions, so those delivered through Change UK and those sorts of online services. I think the general direction of the group, and yet to come to this place to be approved, is that the group were generally happy with the original proposals as put to council, and that the authority was well placed to host online petitions should they be required. Thank you, Chair.
It's part of this principle, if you like, Chair, that petitions should be limited to those with a genuine interest in Plymouth. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to be a registered elector in Plymouth formally. You know, we have people who study and work in Plymouth. I think it would be wrong to say they should be necessarily excluded by the virtue, let's say they live, I don't know, just outside our boundaries. But some of those big online petition sites do it on almost an industrial scale, and you know, the council wants to do such and such. Well, let's get our ready-made tapped of thousands of people who are ready to sign from heaven knows where in, and suddenly you've got 10,000 people who say we should go in a different direction, and that's definitely not the spirit of what we're looking to achieve. So I'm happy to sort of endorse where Ross describes the direction of travel at the moment.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Any further points on the work programme?
Yeah, through you, Chair. I think just to add, I think there was only 2 items on there, but I think we will certainly be bringing along, as Councillor Stevens has outlined, a report in advance of a report concerning the constitution in advance of council consideration at the end of January. And I think the second thing I'd like to add is just another look at that risk monitoring report for you, because I think actually, given where we are at the moment, it's fairly simple just to keep bringing that back so it remains on your agenda.
Thank you. So we now move on to the final agenda item, which is the tracking decisions, pages 177 and 178. Any questions or comments on these from anyone?
Through you, Chair. Just to let members know that obviously since the pack's been published, we've provided an update on the third one on the list there, so that's now complete. So just let you know.
Excellent, thank you. Any further questions or comments? No, wonderful. Thank you all for your time this afternoon, and we've finished with almost an hour to spare. So.
We like you, Chair.
Yeah, that's something else we were looking to build into our procedures. So
Make sure we stay for the full time.
Fabulous. So, yeah.